Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras. And coming up in today's newscast, the country takes another step towards landmark fourth elections as Prime Minister Netanyahu rejects the latest offer to work towards a budget compromise. Meanwhile, the government in Lebanon is resigning, putting the future of Iranian proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, into question. And finally, stay tuned for a deeper look at Israel's evolving challenges in the international arena with special guest, outgoing Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dani Danon. From sharp decline to free fall, Israel's government now seemingly careening towards a new round of elections as Prime Minister Netanyahu casts aside the latest attempts to solve the budget crisis.
The August 25 cutoff to pass a national budget approaching quickly. Alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party is backing a bill to delay the deadline and buy time to come to a compromise. Gantz adding that the delay proposal could be passed in just 24 hours. If no budget is passed, Israel returns to elections.
מי שאוהב את מדינת ישראל לא לוקח אותה לבחירות בעת הזו. מי שאכפת לו מאזרחי ישראל לא עושה צעדים שיביאו לקריסה כלכלית ובריאותית של רבים מהם בתקופת משבר. החלטת הליכוד מאמש להסכים לדחיית אישור התקציב, אם היא אכן כזו, היא אכן החלטה חשובה והכרחית למען אזרחי ישראל.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is still sticking to his guns, though, rejecting the proposal and every other proposal except for his one-year budget plan.
אנחנו לא צריכים 24 שעות, אנחנו לא צריכים אפילו 24 דקות. יש לנו תקציב מוכן, מותאם לקורונה, בדיוק למה שצריכים היום אזרחי ישראל. זה מזרים כסף גם לכיסים של האזרחים, גם לעסקים. זה מוכן, זה מה שצריך להעביר, ואפשר לעשות את זה מיד.
Gantz, aside from pushing a delay to negotiate, is backing a two-year budget proposal as stipulated in the Unity Coalition agreement. And critics are accusing Netanyahu of reneging on that stipulation in hopes of elections, thereby canceling his power-sharing agreement with Gantz. Netanyahu, for his part, however, argues that the coronavirus crisis makes it too difficult to create a good long-term plan. The clash between Gantz and Netanyahu, then, is likely running out the clock, leaving politicians gearing up for another vote in November either way, which would be the fourth election cycle in Israel in under just 2 years. Very few ministers, the exceptions to the rule, still holding out hope for a solution in the next week. Things may indeed turn around, though, depending on the success of a new opposition-led proposal. Set to hit the Knesset floor for a vote on Wednesday, the bill bars politicians from forming a coalition while under indictment. So if passed, it would prevent Netanyahu from assembling a new coalition, assuming new elections were actually called. Netanyahu is currently facing criminal charges of corruption in 3 high-profile cases, and he's set to spend several days a week in court starting January. And whether the bill passes or not essentially now hinges on support from Netanyahu's frenemies within the coalition, like Benny Gantz and his Blue and White Party.
So what do the parties in the coalition actually want, and how far are they willing to take their argument? Joining us to explain whether we're heading for the polls in November or not is Jerusalem Bureau Chief from the Jewish News Syndicate, Alex Tryman. Alex, thank you so much for being with us. Now, to overcome the budget hurdle, Finance Minister Israel Katz offered the Blue and White Party a compromise proposal. What does it include?
Well, the compromise would be to push the deadline for forming a budget, which was originally scheduled for August 25th, back by 100 days. The question is whether it will be a one-year budget, which Netanyahu was pushing for, or a two-year budget, which Benny Gantz is pushing for and is also part of the coalition agreement. It is believed that Netanyahu wants only a one-year budget, which is only for the end of 2020, in order to have a possible trigger to go to elections ahead of a planned rotation agreement with Benny Gantz that would see Gantz become the prime minister in November of next year.
I see. Now, I want to move on actually to a very controversial vote that's going on in the Knesset for a vote tomorrow, pushed by the opposition. it would effectively ban Netanyahu from running should there be new elections if it were passed. Why Gantz originally with the Blue and White Party ran on a platform of supporting this type of legislation that would bar a prime minister from forming a coalition or a minister from forming a coalition while under criminal indictment. Why do you think that they're inching away from that now?
Well, Gantz is actually pushing again towards that same type of legislation to bar Netanyahu. Right now, the government, even though it's called the unity government...
Well, they said that the Blue and White has recently stated that they're going to sit that vote out.
It's believed that there are members of the party that do support it, but there are other members of the Blue and White faction that do not support it. There's no doubt that Gantz seeks to end Netanyahu's reign as the prime minister, and they'll use any possible mechanism to do that, especially if they believe that Netanyahu will not honor the rotation agreement that was set between the parties.
I see. And then, I don't know, could he maybe support the bill and possibly force Netanyahu to honor the unity agreements? Do you think that would work?
Well, that's what the threat is. Really, by threatening to push forward the legislation, they're hoping that Netanyahu will cave on the original terms of the agreement, which stipulate that a 2-year budget needs to be passed. Gantz wants a 2-year budget to be passed because not having a budget is a trigger for elections, and Gantz wants a budget to be in place by the time he is scheduled to take the reins in November of next year.
I see. All right, Alex, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Speaking of new elections, Lebanese government ministers are now resigning from their posts en masse, acquiescing to demands of protesters outside, and this just 1 week into the wake of a deadly catastrophic explosion in Beirut.
نحن اليوم نحتكم إلى الناس إلى مطلبهم بمحاسبة المسؤولين عن هذه الكارثة المختبئة منذ 7 سنوات، إلى رغبتهم بالتغيير الحقيقي من دولة الفساد والهدر والسمسرات والسرقات إلى دولة القانون والعدالة والشفافية، إلى دولة تحترم أبنائها. أمام هذا الواقع نتراجع خطوة إلى الوراء للوقوف مع الناس كي نخوض معركة التغيير معهم. نريد أن نفتح الباب أمام الإنقاذ الوطني الذي يشارك اللبنانيون في صناعته. لذلك أعلن اليوم استقالة هذه الحكومة. الله يحمي لبنان.
That's right, the Lebanese Prime Minister Hassan Diab and indeed the whole government is resigning now amidst growing public fury, beginning with criticisms of the government's handling of a financial crisis, then the coronavirus, and now the Beirut blast, especially following revelations that government officials knew explosive ammonium nitrate at the Beirut port had been there for years, stored haphazardly and waiting like a time bomb. Worse yet, at least 20 more containers of dangerous chemicals have now been discovered to still be at the port, several punctured and leaking after being damaged by last week's blast, which killed over 200, injured thousands, and left homeless nearly 1/3 people. Most government resignations are seemingly coming from a position of solidarity with the people, though, and not shame.
أنا الاستقالة كمان هي مسؤولية، نحن استقلنا كمان مسؤولية مش هروبا من المسؤولية.
Resigning Lebanese Justice Minister Marie-Claude Najem similarly saying that they're not running away from responsibility, but that no one wants to be in power under such circumstances, and that she challenges anyone to put themselves in the government's shoes. The political change-up not without its massive challenges, though. Prime Minister Diab's appointment itself being the result of months of struggles following the resignation of his predecessor, Saad Hariri, last October. Public Works Minister Michael Najjar saying that he hopes the next caretaking government period will not be as long. Meanwhile, Iran is watching the events in Lebanon unfolding closely, under a magnifying glass, with real fears that its years of influence in Lebanon via its terror proxy Hezbollah might be at risk. Hezbollah receiving a good portion of the protesters' fury for alleged involvement in the Beirut explosion, as well as being behind much of the country's corrupt mismanagement. One popular Lebanese blogger's criticism in particular going viral worldwide.
إسرائيل شو عملت فينا أكتر من اللي أنتم عملتوا فينا؟ إسرائيل شو عملت فينا أكتر من اللي أنتوا عملتوه فينا؟ جاوبني. إذا قدرت تجاوب على هيدا السؤال بخي اللي بدك إياه بنجسد لك. جاوب على هالسؤال.
Now, also repeating a critical view of Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, Israeli Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz. Gantz is warning that Israel's next war with Hezbollah, whenever that may be, will likely be infinitely more difficult to fight due to the terror group's practice of storing munitions amongst civilian populations. This becoming a hardened fact in Israel's eyes in light of the last week's explosion in Beirut. Gantz explains that in Lebanon, in the same house, there may be a guest room and a missile room, and that the IDF as a security network must therefore fight enemies that keep weapons and operate in civilian surroundings. So if there's no choice but to fight, the Lebanese people will be those suffering the most dire consequences. Meanwhile, though, these comments come as Israel is actually scaling back its reinforcements on the Lebanese border, in assumptions that Hezbollah is unlikely to mount attacks in the coming weeks. Instead, forces are focusing more on the south. A recent rise in the use of explosives tied to balloons floating from Gaza into Israeli communities, driving Israel to retaliate against Hamas positions in the Gaza Strip and close the Kerem Shalom crossing to commercial goods. Moving on, Israel's incoming ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, has now taken off with his family to begin his new mission at the United Nations headquarters in New York. But what challenges await him? Outgoing UN Ambassador Dani Danon joins us to explain the challenges that this position faces. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure. Now,
thank you very much for having me.
Now, after 5 years in which you represented Israel in a sometimes hostile arena, what do you think are the major challenges that Israel faces on the world stage?
So the UN is still a hostile arena, but we are not isolated. When you look at the numbers, we have diplomatic relations with 160 countries out of the 193 members of the UN. Many more, we have quiet diplomatic relations. I myself traveled to the UAE, to Morocco, to other destinations, and it's still done quietly. I think the challenge is to take those relations and actually make them public. And it's not easy, but I think it will happen in the near future. And also there is the challenge of COVID-19. Today, the UN is not really functioning. The UN General Assembly will not meet this coming September. The leaders will send their presentation by videos. So it will not be the same, but we will have to continue to push against Iran, the nuclear deal, the arm embargo that the Security Council will have to decide about it in October. So the issue of Iran will always be there.
All right, now speaking of Iran, actually one of the major challenges that you faced during your tenure, as you just mentioned, is the P15 or P5+1 rather, JCPOA nuclear deal with Iran. Do you think that the UN has done enough to stop Iran from acquiring weapons that can be turned against Israel?
Absolutely not. And you know that our position in the US, we were not happy with the JCPOA. But what we are telling our colleagues today, those who supported the agreement, look at the agreement that you signed. They are not fulfilling the agreement. So you have to take actions. You have to apply more sanctions. And I think we are seeing countries like Germany, for example, that are starting to shift to our direction. The decision of Germany to outlaw Hezbollah completely a few months ago, it is a good sign. And I hope that other countries like the UK and France will follow Germany and will understand that they have to behave differently with the Iranian. You cannot appease them.
All right, now another controversial issue that's on the world stage, the Israeli annexation of Judea and Samaria, which was supposed to be announced, but now it's moved to an unknown date, among other things due to the lack of support from the United States, actually, and other countries in Europe. Do you think that Israel should continue to insist on implementing this move?
So first, I want to correct you. I don't call it annexation. I call it applying Israeli sovereignty over the Jewish communities or part of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. It is a bold decision to take. We have done it in the past on the Golan Heights. Menachem Begin did it in 1981. Levi Eshkol did it in 1967 regarding a part of Jerusalem. So the government of Israel will have to decide about it. It's not easy nowadays because of the COVID-19 and the economical crisis, but I think history will judge us because we will overcome the crisis. But if we will take that decision, it will be an historical decision, and that is for the Israeli government to decide. And then we can go to our allies in Washington and ask them to support us. But at the end of the day, the decision should and will be taken in Jerusalem.
All right, now I want to kind of come back to international relations, because during your tenure as ambassador, you were actually the first Israeli to be elected to a permanent standing committee at the United Nations, and later you served as vice president of the General Assembly and head of the Innovation, Technology, and Science Forum. How do you think Israel's identity as the startup nation has helped in the political field?
So I think we're in a great place today, and we should do more. By the way, we are very proud of being a startup nation. We are all proud of the innovation and technology. I think we can help more. We speak a lot about Tikkun Olam, but we don't do enough. Today, Israel is not a small country, it's not a weak country anymore, and we have the capabilities to help developing countries in Africa, in Asia, in Central America. I want to encourage the government to invest more and to actually send our experts to help those communities. First of all, it's the right thing to do, and also diplomatically, it will help us in the long run.
All right, now rumor has it that your next job, I want to move into the future, will be as ambassador to Australia. Is there any truth to this?
So I heard a lot of offers since I landed in the Ben Gurion airport. My dear friend, Ambassador Nikki Haley, gave me a great piece of advice. She told me, when you come back to Israel, take your time. Don't make any declarations, don't make any decisions, take your time. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm catching up with my family and my relatives. So I will take my time, and I think in a few weeks I will decide. But I can tell you that I will stay involved in public life. I come back with the knowledge, with the experience, and I'm eager to continue with the public service.
All right, so speaking of this public service and your experience, Gilad Erdan, again, your successor, he just took off for New York. What is the best advice that you can maybe give him as he's filling your shoes?
So I met my friend Gilad, and I told him to be open-minded, to speak with everybody. Some of my best friends are from countries that we do not have diplomatic relations yet. So you have to be open-minded to build bridges. You never know when you will need those people. And the fact that I brought to Israel more than 100 UN ambassadors, and today they are personal friends, it's going to help Israel also in the future, because many of those ambassadors are already ministers of foreign affairs, head of state. So I told him, be nice and make a lot of friends.
All right, Ambassador Dani Danon, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Turning back now to COVID-19, the government's latest regulations take effect today. But hopes of opening the country sooner than later may just be a coronavirus fever dream.
Now fully embedded in the Israeli vocabulary, Israeli coronavirus czar Professor Roni Gamzu's traffic light plan now hitting the ground running. But chair of the coronavirus cabinet, Likud MK Yifat Shasha Biton, is already pushing back, saying at least some plans have no chance of materializing. Specifically, plans to reopen Israel to international travel within a week by August 16. As Shasha Biton explains, the plan rests on forming a list of so-called green countries where infection rates are low, allowing for tourism. But no such list has been provided. And even travel agents are pointing out that with less than a week before the planned opening date, there's no system for testing, no diplomatic agreements with other countries, no destinations to fly to, and no tourists to come to Israel, let alone bookings that can be reliably made. At any rate, though, Israel is hard at work trying to reduce the rate of infection. New recorded cases over the past 24 hours, raising the total in Israel now to over 85,000. Over 24,700 actively ill, nearly 400 in severe condition, and the death toll nearing 620. Professor Gamzu's new outline then, including maintaining of distance and hygiene measures, the continued closure of clubs, bars, indoor events, amusement parks, and more. Gatherings are still also limited to 20 outdoors and 10 indoors, and no traveling in private vehicles with more than 2 unrelated passengers. Local authorities and places of business must also place signs explaining the rules in their buildings or public spaces, including requiring masks and distancing. Then next, with respect to eateries, the law continues, limiting spaces to 20 people inside and 30 people outside. There's also a 15-person limit for group therapies. And finally, delivered goods must be placed outside the door to limit contact. The exception to the rules announced by Prime Minister Netanyahu being for outdoor events and performances as long as they abide by hygiene regulations. Meanwhile, the coronavirus cabinet, having been reduced a few weeks ago, is now being expanded again to include Housing Minister and former Health Minister Yaakov Litzman, as well as Social Equality Minister Meirav Cohen.
Speaking of COVID-19, if you had to cancel your wedding because of the coronavirus plague, you should listen to this. Tel Aviv Yafo is now inviting couples to marry in intimate open-air weddings to be held at stunning Tel Aviv locations. Eitan Schwartz, Director of Communications at the Tel Aviv Yafo municipality, joins us with the details. Eitan, thank you so much for being with us. Now, what are the urban locations that you're offering couples to get married in?
Well, essentially, we're offering all the major parks in the city, and there's some very, very unique gems that even avid Tel Avivians don't know. For instance, we have a fantastic rock garden in Ganei Yoshua in Hayarkon Park. We have a tropical garden over there. These are unbelievable parks that very few people know, and keeping up with the guidelines of our Ministry of Health, we will allow people to marry up to 20 people together in the open air for free. We provide basic infrastructure. They provide the bride, the groom, and of course, the mother-in-law.
And have you received any offers to maybe hold or any inquiries to hold weddings in maybe strange places? Unusual locations, maybe outside that registry?
Not yet. But the response has been overwhelming. More than 100 couples asked to register during the next 2 months. And it must be said that this is part of a phenomenon throughout Israel, where people that were scheduled to be married around this time after the holiday of Tu B'Av are seeking other options. And we're providing that because we want people to be happy, to have a romantic moment in the city, and if possible, to spend a lot of money on local businesses. When they're done, go out for dinner and drinks with their extended family.
So what else is maybe included in your offer, though, that that the happy couples can get from the municipality for their nuptials, or is it just the location? It's the location and basic infrastructure. So we're talking about tables, chairs, the basic setting that you need for a wedding. Yeah. Wow. All right. Now I understand that you and the municipality, you're also trying to help residents who want to leave home for entertainment. You've successfully launched a pilot for drive-in theaters. What else is the municipality planning for the future? So our old historic drive-in location, which is in the northern part of town and no longer serves as a drive-in cinema, was converted to be that last week. It was a very successful operation, so we're re-extending that, and it's going to happen again this week. And at the end of August, we're going to do something fantastic again in the Yarkon Park. We have an artificial lake with pedal boats and rowing boats, and we're going to do essentially a sail-in movie theater. So 70 people or 70 families will be able to go on boats and see a movie while maintaining social distancing from the lake, from the boat, on a huge screen. We're going to have 2 screenings every evening. The first one is going to be for kids. The second one is going to be some type of romantic comedy for adults. And that's already, we can mark that as a hit. So we're trying all kinds of ways to provide some income to our artists. So, for instance, we subsidize artists performing in bars or in restaurants. All right, well, I cannot wait to go and check out some of these movie opportunities. Those sound amazing. Eitan, thank you so much for sharing some of this with us.
Thank you. Sure.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be cool. It'll cool off just a little bit more from yesterday. Lows sitting around 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect more partly cloudy skies and highs similarly falling to upwards of 90 Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius. And finally, before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Oh my gosh, this is so me every day. This is how I live my life, the life of a newsman, just up at 3 a.m. It's a party. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.4 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.